Namaste. Welcome to Urban.chatterati. This is Abhinav Prakash. And today I'm joined by two special guests, Ruchir Sharma, who is a public policy reformer, a keen observer of Indian polity, and also the former advisor to the left parties. Ruchir, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
And then I have with me again Alexei Arora, the comrade Alexei Arora, to discuss the what's wrong with the left parties, because he's Russian, he's half Russian, half Indian, and he's a keen observer of Indian polity. So, comrade Alexei, Jai Shri Ram.
Jai Shri Ram and здравствуйте to all my Indian tavarishi.
So, let's start by asking the simple question. Why did the left parties fail to appeal to the majority of the Indians when they started their politics in the 1920s, and why they haven't learned any lessons in the last 100 years? So, Ruchir, I'd like you to comment first.
Sure. So if we look at the nature of the birth of the Indian Communist parties, it didn't even happen in India. So the birth of the Communist Party of India did not happen on Indian soil. It happened in exile in Tashkent. So in modern day Uzbekistan, back then the Uzbek SSR, part of the USSR. And it was established by Comintern, so via Moscow, which was the Soviet Communist Party's international arm, so the Communist International, that was created to mentor and sponsor communist movements around the world. They handpicked M.N. Roy, who had already set up the Communist Party of Mexico beforehand. And this was in 1920. The initial years of the Communist Party of India with M.N. Roy were focused on a liberation, national liberation plus building socialism ideology. However, that was soon seen as politically inconvenient, especially in the 30s and 40s, when the danger of a Second World War was looming in Europe. So as a result, people like M.N. Roy were sidelined, and instead the orders from Moscow came not to rock the boat with the relationship with the British Empire. And as a result, the Communist Party of India was handed over for mentorship to the Communist Party of Great Britain. Because in the Communist Party of Great Britain, there was a historian and very prominent theoretician called Rajni Palme Dutt, who was half Swedish, half Indian. He was the uncle of a man who went on to become Prime Minister of Sweden, Olof Palme. So the road to the old Delhi airport in Delhi is Olof Palme Marg, named after him. But Rajni Palme Dutt was a unique scholar. He was seen as the leading authority on India within Comintern. And it was his responsibility to mentor the CPI. However, he was primarily a member of the CPGB, the Communist Party of Great Britain. And there's a conflict of interest there because a Communist Party, or even a leftist party, in a Western industrialized colonial metropole has different priorities to one in a colonized country. Now, in an already developed country, then you have a redistribution agenda. You don't want to change your relations of international trade. You just want to allocate the bounty of your colonial empire in a more equitable way to buy peace between the working class, middle class, and upper class in your country. However, in a colonial country, that doesn't help people. People in India wanted national liberation. Now, CPI was told not to engage in national liberation as a result. So, of course, there was no way to harness any of the grassroots resentment against the British Empire when you're not fighting the British Empire. You can't say that, oh, we stand for redistribution when there's nothing to redistribute. There's no indigenous capital. First, you have to liberate the country. First, you have to unite the country. And instead, you had bizarre theories that, oh, India is not a real country, needs to be split into 17 socialist republics, which are so unfeasible, it's as if the CPI was trying to antagonize the masses. And what's particularly amusing is that throughout the the Second World War, throughout the Quit India movement, throughout Direct Action Day, throughout all of the events of the 40s, the CPI was nowhere to be seen in fighting the forces of communalism, of partition, of the British Raj. But once we became independent, then the CPI said, oh, ye azadi jhuti hai, and started fighting independent India in Telangana. Not even fighting the Razakars, not fighting the Nizam. So you wait for India to become independent, you wait for India to defeat the Nizam, and then you take up arms and say people's war, and now we're going to fight to build socialism and build in real independence. So of course, there's no appetite for that at the grassroots. There were already Indian socialists, there were already Indian Marxists, there were Indian Leninists. People like Bhagat Singh didn't need a party apparatus to tell them how to build a national liberation movement. So the Hindustan Republican Socialist Republican Association, for example, or you had the M.N. Royist faction. So M.N. Roy, when he was pushed out of the CPI, went back to working with Savarkar and built an alternative draft constitution of India, for example. Now, as a result of the bizarre circumstances of the birth of the CPI, it never really became a typical developing world communist movement. Because if you look at the others, if you look at Vietnam, if you look at Cuba, you look at North Korea, look at China, these are 4 relatively successful communist states in the third world, in the global south. What do they have in common? They all first fought for national liberation. They were first primarily motivated by patriotism and nationalism. Once they achieved that, once they kicked out the foreigners through a mass mobilization of the people, then on that foundation, they built a socialist state.
Yeah.
Now, that didn't happen in India, and because of that, there was a huge trust deficit among the people between the foundation of the CPI to the entire history of independent India. There's a great article in the Harvard Crimson from the 1967 elections, so 20 years after independence, by the former editor of Hindustan Times, Hiranmay Karlekar. In his younger days, he spent a year as a Nieman Fellow at Harvard. And he wrote even then that the reason the CPI can't mobilize any votes is that the people think that they have extraterritorial loyalties, because it's true. It was sponsored from abroad, and you're sent to just manage the situation until the right situation comes up for organic communism.
Yeah,
or to create a
clan state. We'll come to that point, because that's a very interesting point you are making, because we see that even today, the Communist parties of India writing love letter to China, pledging their unwavering loyalty to the CCP, which no other Communist party is doing. I mean, Japanese Communist Party in Vietnam, they're not doing that. Only Indian Communist Party are falling over it. But coming to you, Alexei, as Ruchir Sharma pointed out, that the Communist Party of India started abroad, especially, M.N. Roy basically imagined that he can mobilize an Islamic army, the people who were fleeing India to join the Caliphate movement in Turkey. He could mobilize them and recruit the Central Asian army of the Muslims and invade India to get rid of British rule and establish the true communist rule. And this is a recurring theme. The Communist Party speak a language which is alien to the Hindus, to say it correctly, right? So they have designed their entire political language, symbolism, everything around mobilizing Muslims, and Hindus simply are, the secondary characters. This is why they have a huge problem with Jai Shri Ram, even Vande Mataram, but they are the one who will sing Hum Dekhenge and all those kind of songs. What do you think about this point?
So I think one of the most, one of the things I wish to point out is that during the 1971 war, the communists in India, in West Bengal, were very supportive of the refugees that were coming from the Hindu refugees, etc., that were coming from East Pakistan, now Bangladesh. And it's not that they were exclusively looked at as a anti-Hindu people party, maybe against the religion of Hinduism, but they were not in the sense anti-Hindu as such, because they were supportive of the refugees that were coming, Bengali Hindu refugees, and they had a large chunk of vote base of Bengali Hindus as well, even until 2011, after which they lost to Mamata Banerjee. So in that sense, I think that, there is a conflict within the party, especially because the old brass is obviously they're against religions of all sorts. They claim to be against religions of all sorts, but obviously they are very open to forming alliances with, so-called secular parties, which are actually led by Islamists. But at the same time, there are the second part, I think, is the college scene in India. I think there the leftists are somewhat more radical than what we have as the old brass of all the communist parties that exist in India. And these radical leftists are, in my view, far more utopian than the brass that exists of all communist parties in India. Azadi and all of that stuff. So I think the two have a sort of conflict between them, but they are also united in many of the ways due to their ideology. But I think one must realize that the communists in India, I think Ruchir very nicely pointed out, were initially supposed to be a national liberation movement, but that sort of faltered out. Initially when World War II was happening, first, in 1943, they said, the communists must support the war because of an attack on the great socialist fatherland of Russia. So they were very keen on supporting the war, and they were very keen on putting India's national liberation secondary to supporting the great socialist fatherland, motherland, whatever, etc. And when Subhash Chandra Bose decided that, Subhash Chandra Bose actually went to Stalin to seek advice and to build up the Indian National Army. But Stalin was not willing to do that because he was at the time trying to get the support of the British against Nazi Germany. So naturally, Bose went to Nazi Germany, and when he went to Nazi Germany, he met with Hitler, etc. It was a very half-hearted effort, but he got much more support from the Imperial Japanese. And the communists in India were attacking the Indian. They were attacking Subhash Chandra Bose as being a stooge of the Japanese and an imperial puppet and so on. So it's very funny to me as well when today they try to claim the legacy of Subhash Chandra Bose as their own, but. What's also fundamentally interesting to note is, apart from this, because Subhash Chandra Bose was motivated mainly by nationalism first, then socialism second. Subhash Chandra Bose was a socialist, he called himself one. But the difference is that when you look at Indonesia as a country, their independence leader, the father of their country, essentially, his name was Sukarno. He sought full support from the Japanese against the Dutch and against the British in his war for national liberation. He's hailed as a hero. And when he came into power, he built an alliance because, Indonesia is a majority Muslim country. He built an alliance with Islamists and communists before he was ultimately overthrown in a coup by Suharto. So, in that sense, the communists with their internationalist ideology have been in a weird way antithetical towards Indian nationalism. And it's not that these socialist internationalism and Indian or nationalism for your own country are incompatible. They are very much compatible. We have had leaders around the world. Ho Chi Minh led the struggle for national liberation. When Ho Chi Minh arrived in France to study and to seek guidance of how to liberate his country from France, he looked at various different forms of nationalism, and he actually found out that Lenin's version of national liberation and so on was best suited to his country. So it is not that communism itself is something that is antithetical to national liberation. It's supportive of national liberation. We've had Bhagat Singh as well. As much as he loved the Gita, he also read Lenin, and he also read a lot of socialist works. We've also had Tito in Yugoslavia, who liberated his country, but also ensured that he would not subdue his own country to the domination of the Soviets. So he played both the Soviets and the Americans against each other. The Sino-Soviet split, even Mao was, in that sense, you could consider him a nationalist, because he decided that after Khrushchev came to power, he was not going to change his way of government because Khrushchev did not like Stalin. Similarly, Vietnam today is against China. Sure, Vietnam's Communist Party sent a small message of congratulations, but they did not write an essay like Sitaram Yechuri did of, oh my God, I love the communist, long live the Communist Party of China. No, they're pragmatic, And if, for example, protests are happening in Vietnam, they're more or less sanctioned by the Communist Party in Vietnam. And Vietnam has seen more and more anti-Chinese protests than they have seen ever anti-American protests. In fact, the country that actually dislikes China the most and views China as the greatest threat is not India. It is Vietnam, according to polls. So, in that sense, to say that communism is antithetical to nationalism is not something I would agree with, because historical examples and even present examples show us that communism is useful for achieving national liberation and developing socialism and the productive forces of socialism within one's country. It's just that the Indian communists decided that, we are going to completely abandon the national liberation part. We're going to focus on the internationalism part that no worker cares about, and then say that our socialism is purer than that of Deng Xiaoping.
Yeah, so that's an interesting point. But Ruchir, coming to you, I'm going to ask the same question to you. M.N. Roy wrote a very third-rated book, Historical Role of Islam in India, in which he praises Islam as the great civilizing force in India, which is bringing light of true religion to the pagan, dirty, polytheistic Hindus and so on. And this is something we have been seeing. This strand is there with the Communist Party. They supported the creation of Pakistan. Communist Party provided all the intellectual cover to the Pakistan movement. And even after partition, they continue to whitewash and justify the role of Islamism in the creation of Pakistan. Even today, you see, they will never come to defense of the Hindu population or the Hinduism, but they will be the forefront of combating quote unquote Islamophobia and whatnot. Why do you think that is the case with the Communist Party in India? Why they are so antithetical to the majority section, which is Hindu, that you don't even speak their language? In fact, you ridicule them in your daily language, but you are very pro-Muslims, which is a minority population. What logic is that?
Sorry. This is a byproduct of not being an organic movement from the grassroots and built from the bottom up. As a result, because they didn't have a support base to grow out of, they made cynical alliances. Now, as Alexei mentioned, there was a time when the left parties were seen as the Hindu parties in West Bengal or in Kerala, and the party of East Bengali Hindu refugees. However, that was an aberration, and it was primarily when they were in opposition. As soon as they got a taste of power, they acted like any other party does, because of a certain incentive structure and the limitations of the Indian state. The Indian state functions on patronage. Now, the issue with this alliance, wherein the communist parties or the left parties provide intellectual cover, and then they rely on Islamist leadership and conservative Sunni leadership, to be precise, for street power or muscle power, is quite a counterproductive strategy in the long run. Like, it works maybe in the short term. It is maybe the original form of what is now called intersectionality or wokeness, where you get two disparate groups, but because they share a certain short-term goal, you come together. But I've said this before, that the problem with intersectionality, the problem with getting three or four or even two different groups where one is heading in this direction, one is going in that direction, and they have an intersection, is that yes, they have that intersection, and that intersection is, oh, we want partition, or we want to come to power. But then what happens after that? Are they going to become straight and go in a straight line after that? No, they still have their original goals and they still want to go there. As a result, historically speaking, whenever you've seen this alliance between communists and Islamists, only one survives in the long run. You can take the example of the Iranian Revolution of 1979. So Shah Raza Pahlavi was the king of Iran. He was quite pro-American. He was quite anti-Islamist. He was engaging in a revivalism of ancient pre-Islamic Persian culture with the festival of Persepolis, for example. And he was deposed by an alliance between the Communist Party of Iran, Tudeh, and various Shia clerics from the conservative Islamist faction. Now, successfully, they removed the head of the state. They created a new Republican form of government. And what happened then? There was a power struggle between the two factions. And the communists again, so they fought the Shah because he was torturing them and throwing them into jail. They helped the Ayatollah come to power. What did the Ayatollah do? He tortured them and sent them to jail or into exile. Another example is right next door to us. So in Pakistan, is there a left party now? Are there left journalists? Are there leftist politicians? Are there leftist intellectuals? There's maybe 5. The rest are dead, in prison, or in exile. And that's the logical end to an alliance where you don't have shared goals, don't have shared ideology, don't have shared methods. You just have a shared tactic at one point that, we both hate X, let's remove X together and then see what happens, and then stab each other in the back.
In fact, we forget Pakistan or Iran. We see that in Kerala. Where are the left politicians in the northern Kerala? Where are the left politicians in southern Assam? Where are the left politicians in the, let's say, the eastern West Bengal? Where are the left politicians in, let's say, what you call Kashmir? Right? Forget the reasons. I mean, where is the Communist Party? Where is ISFI in Aligarh Muslim University? I mean, they have no heft in those campuses. But still we see them, they are going for an alliance with the radical Islamist parties. But Comrade Alexei, why do you think that the left has failed to adopt, to learn from the mistake? Because its language has become even more shrill, which antagonizes the average Indian, whether it's on the plank of nationalism in general, supporting Kashmir ki azadi, Bharat tere tukde honge, all kind of nonsense, and also the religious identity, because recent surveys of the Pew Research Center shows that Indians are extremely religious, whether they are Muslims, Hindus, or whatever, they hold their faith very dear to them. So why the left is on a societal path? You don't respect even territorial integrity, nationalism, you don't even respect the religious sentiment, and you are living in your own la-la land.
So what's interesting about, I think one of the most interesting things I see today is Kerala. Kerala is one place where in the communist government of Pinarayi Vijayan supported a Ramayana week and criticized the Congress party for being in bed with Islamist parties in Kerala. So there's a reason they're winning in Kerala, and it's a pretty simple explanation if you look at this. But I'm not saying that they are the Hindu party. It is just that there is, Congress is more of an Islamist party than CPIM is, and CPIM is like, okay, you know what, we'll criticize you for being more Islamist, and that is how they're winning the Hindu vote. But to understand what is wrong with the communists in India, you have to understand their top brass, right? So firstly, there are 3 communist parties. The CPI, which is dead, doesn't exist, effectively doesn't exist. The CPIM, you have
Kanhaiya Kumar as the great leader, great hope of CPI.
Yeah, the great hope, which could not get elected to what is this, Giriraj? I don't remember his name. But
Kanhaiya lost in his own gully, in his own college.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, that was when I was more of a left idealist, that was a sad moment for me, but now I think that is hilarious. But I think moving on, I think so CPI is mostly dead as a party. The CPIM exists as the fifth column of Chinese interests, and the CPI-ML barely has any national presence, but they are reformed Maoists who decided that we're going to take the electoral path. Now, the funny thing is CPI-ML, the former Maoists, are the only communist party that criticizes China's record on Uyghur Muslims. But again, because they're former Maoists, they cannot venture too far, and nor do they have any electoral appeal.
Let me cut you. They are criticizing China on the Xinjiang because they want to appeal to the Muslims. Let's come back to the same point. They will never criticize China for its excesses in Tibet.
Exactly. So it all comes to one circle. But I think what one has to realize is the failure of I'm going to discard CPI-ML because they're not nationally irrelevant. But if you look at, for example, both the other CPI and CPIM, their top brass are mostly all Rajya Sabha MPs, which means that they have no electoral experience. They were just appointed Rajya Sabhas. You don't get elected as a Rajya Sabha MP. If you have enough state legislature seats, your party can get representation in the Rajya Sabha. So Sitaram Yechury is a Rajya Sabha MP. He's not a Lok Sabha MP. There are not many Lok Sabha MPs of the communists in India. At one point, they were at 60 in 2004. Now they are at total 5, combining both parties. The other problem is that the new ones, the new brass of CPIM, are coming from universities. They are not coming from the working class. If you look at, for example, the BJP in Bengal, they were fielding domestic workers. They were fielding actual working class people. Who were the communists fielding? They were fielding this woman called Aisha Ghosh, who just graduated from JNU. How is this building a movement of the working class when you're having, aristocratic sort of college graduated people? I don't know. But I think this is the issue, is that the old brass does not know how to win elections. And the new brass, apart from not knowing how to win elections, is utopian and not working class. So in that sense, this is the problem for the communists. Now, they hold sway over unions. They have their own, C2 and CITU and all those kind of unions. But the issue is union workers may go on strike with them. But then again, more people are in their unions than vote for them. So there is an even bigger problem there, that many of their union members are not even voting for them. So I think the communists have to understand that not only is their social policy just completely haphazard, because they're not appealing to the majority. And if you're claiming to be a movement of the majority, which is the working class, and you're not appealing to the majority's cultural inclinations, which we know from the Pew survey is they're very religious, they're not going to, suddenly say religion is the opiate of the masses. They would rather do puja, or they would rather go for a namaz. So that's the thing. So the thing is, it's not that the CPIM does not realize that, most of India is religious. They realize that. But there are obviously certain sections of religions they appeal to because of the nature of their, cultural imposition of the majoritarian will and so on. So it's a very, very contradictory thing that exists within the communists, wherein they claim to want to represent the majority, which is the working class, but culturally they are pro-minority. So this is the contradiction. But that's the thing, because economically they think they are purer than Deng Xiaoping. They don't think we need, capitalism and then we get to socialism. They think we can redistribute poverty and call it socialism. And on the other hand, they appeal to religions that are in the minority, but have no appeal to those who are in the majority, while claiming to want to represent the majority, that is the working class.
Yeah, in fact, they ridicule the working class, the Hindu working class, as fascist Nazis who are lynching and who are, destroying democracy and so on. Ruchir, coming to you, and this is the last question for this session. Do you think that the left has any hope in India? You have advised that you have worked with the left parties in the past. Do you think these guys have any hope whatsoever in the coming, let's say, few decades?
Not in their current form. They're not just dying, they're already dead because of the leadership. The leadership are completely out of touch, not just with the voters, not just with the masses, even with their own members, the grassroots cadre. They don't understand each other, they don't speak the same language. And this has been seen on the ground as well, that in the 2019 Lok Sabha elections, CPIM cadre, so grassroots members, were going door to door in constituencies, in villages, and telling people to vote for the BJP because the CPIM was not strong enough. And they coined a slogan, Pehle Ram, Fir Ram. So first vote for Ram, then you can vote for the left, which is actually a beautiful slogan. It actually, it encapsulates what I was saying at the beginning. This is the liberationist revolutionary socialism that Vietnam and Cuba and Yugoslavia and China believed in. First, unify a sovereign country with a common identity. Then you have the luxury of building socialism. Now, during this time, the wise old men of the Politburo saw this happening and were completely impotent. They couldn't even stop it because the party members were doing what they felt was right. And meanwhile, you had the Politburo saying, it's such a shame that this happened. I can't understand it. This is very unfortunate. Now, this is not unfortunate. This is not unforeseen. You have alienated your own members. This has been happening for a while. And you've alienated them because you have treated the party as some sort of aesthetic choice. That you're not treating the party as a movement to mobilize voters and deliver aspirations. That now it's become about virtue signaling, how secular you are or what values you believe in, so that you get headlines in the newspapers and you get screen time at NDTV because your cousin owns it. Now, how is that an effective way to run a party? That you have seen a complete vote transfer from the left front, which had 42% vote share at the 2009 elections, and the BJP only had 6% for the Lok Sabha elections. 10 years later, in the 2019 Lok Sabha elections, the left front had a 6% vote share, and the BJP had a 42% share. Because it's the same policies, the same concerns that voters have. Once they realize that this party is not serious, it's not actually committed to delivering, material prosperity or physical safety, then we'll choose another one that is more serious about it, that's more credible. Now, people seem to misunderstand that because voters voted for the CPIM in the past, that makes them dyed-in-the-wool, hardcore communists. No, they voted because they were anti-Congress voters, and the CPIM or CPI in their constituency had the best chance of defeating the Congress and promised a certain level of material welfareism. Now, there's another party that does that much better. Now, if you want to stay a serious force at the national level, you have to do a course correction. You have to understand what voters want. You have to understand what motivates voters, and you have to deliver that. And you have to make that promise credible. You can't promise them the moon and then deliver them nothing. Then they'll punish you even more. But this is something that the current generation of leadership don't understand and are on their way out. The real risk to these parties are the next generation of leadership who are even more out of touch, who have gone to new extremes and are basically neo-Maoist, neo-Naxals. And the problem is that because the party is still dependent on patronage from abroad, that why does the CPIM exist? Because it's split off from the CPI, because they had this huge controversy in the 60s where they said, oh, you are right-wing communists, you are left-wing communists. And what did that mean? It meant that the right-wing CPI were pro-Moscow and the left-wing CPIM were pro-Beijing. And pro-Beijing means you benefit from a certain protection under their wing. So the purpose of the party is simply to represent Beijing's interests in India and make India more amenable to Beijing. As a result, the leadership doesn't care. The next generation of leadership also doesn't care if they win elections or not. The fact that they say the right things and get media appearances is enough for them because that's their only incentive.
Basically,
that has to change.
They're working as a lobby group for the foreign powers. That's a very important point. But Alexei, the failure of the left, we have talked about what they have done wrong. But is it also because that we already have a national left party in India, which is the Sangh Parivar? Do you think that the Sangh Parivar occupies the left space? The Hindu left is RSS and its different outfits, which has denied any space for the growth of the Communist Party.
So one sort of, I don't like to make parallels of Indian parties with the West because I think they fall short and, many other reasons. But I think the one parallel that you wish to see, that you can see, with Sangh Parivar and the BJP is in UK that existed called the One Nation conservatism. Now, this was an ideology developed by conservative British Prime Minister Benjamin Disraeli, and his policy essentially was against, at that time, the liberals, the Whigs. The Whigs were pro-free trade, pro-industrialization, and they were pro-liberalism and pro-capitalism. Now, the conservatives, therefore, took a position saying that we want to regulate them. So in that sense, in terms of social welfare, in terms of, economic sort of social security net, the conservatives were to the left of the liberals. But at the same time, they were socially conservative because they were the conservative party. So they were, economically center-left and socially right-wing. That was what One Nation conservatism in the late 19th century was. Now, this is somewhat similar to what you see with the, RSS and the BJP ideology. I would not think that, they are left. I don't think there is anyone left in India except the left. India's, political discourse cannot be accurately mapped on the Western version of the left-right spectrum. One must have to develop our own understanding of the left-right spectrum. But BJP, in that sense, kind of resembles the fact that, we are consolidating our vote as a united Hindu vote. And we engage in social welfare. Now, this is a form of, like I said, One Nation conservatism. This was also a form of, Prussian nationalism of Otto von Bismarck in the late 19th century, where he, while he banned the Socialist Party, the Social Democratic Party, whatever, but at the same time expanded health insurance, expanded unemployment insurance, workplace injury insurance, while being a conservative, while being a strong Prussian monarchist. I see the BJP more as a sort of Bismarckian, and the RSS as more of a Bismarckian party. Even if you look at RSS's economic history, they're economically nationalist. Now, the BJP may not be economically nationalist because they're more open to foreign direct investment. And that is something that, we all know is a minor conflict that exists between RSS and BJP. So RSS, in that sense, is more of an economically nationalist party. And the BJP are not as economically nationalist, but to an extent, they are also economically nationalist party. So I wouldn't say they're left-wing in any way. It's just that they are pro-noblesse oblige, they're pro-welfare, and you do not have to be left-wing to be pro-welfare. It's just that it is a liberal essential, the essential emergence of liberalism was to do away with the aristocratic noblesse oblige that the aristocrats gave to the peasants and so on. That was the essence of liberalism. Every man must write their own destiny. So in that sense, once you realize that, the BJP looks like a more aristocratic party, but that has a lot of support with the subaltern classes. So in that sense, they have managed to merge the left's voter base with a socially conservative, a nationalist vision, while having economics that are considered, something like Tony Blair in the United Kingdom, where, while not necessarily, while they are privatizing, but they're also expanding the welfare state to exceedingly, unimaginable proportions never before seen in India.
Interesting. So this was a very interesting discussion, Ruchir and Alexei, but there's always a time limitation, and we also have to keep some material for the next round. But thanks a lot for your time, Comrade Alexei and Ruchir.
Thanks so much for hosting us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, audience, for listening to us. Please subscribe to the channel. You can also join as a member to support the channel. And in the end, Jai Shri Ram, comrade. See you soon.